Okay, so that's working for what you need? Okay. I'm just going to sit right here for a minute and welcome you and say thanks for coming out on a beautiful second day of fall when it might be more appealing to be, I don't know, in the park or somewhere on a nice day, which is maybe where some of the folks are that intended to come. But I'm glad you're here. Whoever comes, those are the right people to show up, and I'm happy to have you here for this conversation, which I generally, in talks like this or in classes that I teach, I usually start off the title by saying it's I don't want to talk about it, because it's all stuff that people generally don't want to talk about when it comes to advanced planning and disposition, which is an interesting word that we'll talk about. And I taught a class for SCANS, the Seniors College Association of Nova Scotia, that was called I Don't Want to Talk About It, for 6 weeks. And so that seemed to resonate with people, the things that... It needs to be reminded.
It was a fantastic course.
Oh,
but
thank you. Thank you. So yes, this is not going to be very... So are you viewing this as a remedial session or something? Because you've done this. Okay. All right. So it's okay to have a remedial class if you've done it before. And this is part of the events that are happening this week through the Grief Matters group. And we are delighted that Dr. Mary Ellen McDonald, who's the co-lead of that initiative, joined us this morning, given the very busy list of events that are happening. So Mary Ellen, why don't you just tell us a little bit about what's happening there, and I'm going to come over with this because the people that are online need to hear.
Fancy,
So
fancy,
you can just
fancy,
hold
fancy.
that.
Okay, okay. So hi, good morning, everyone. So I co-direct an organization called Grief Matters, and you can find us online, griefmatters.ca. And so griefmatters.ca, it started in Nova Scotia, but it's becoming a national organization. We're trying to take over the entire country, one province at a time. And last year we had a week of grief and death literacy events, and it went so well that we decided to try it again this year. We have it was the 20th of September to the 29th, 37 events happening in Nova Scotia, in New Brunswick, in Quebec, in Ontario, and even one in BC. Some of them are in person, like this one. Some of them are online. So look at the schedule at griefmatters.ca and find lots of other events that will inspire you. And the whole idea behind Grief Matters is we believe grief is something that, first of all, is normal. Second of all, we need better public spaces where we can actually bring our grief with us when we go. And so one of the things that we're trying to do with Grief Matters is to inspire community organizations, public citizens, everyone, all of us, to think of how could we make our world a little bit more attuned to death, dying, and loss. And so check us out and let us know what you think.
And what do you do in your real life?
Oh, in my real life, I'm a professor at Dalhousie. I have the J&W Murphy Foundation Endowed Chair in Palliative Care. I am not a clinician. I'm an anthropologist. I'm a researcher at Dalhousie.
Very glad you're here, Mary Ellen, and that you have taken the initiative to do this with your co-lead who's in Waterloo. Right. So I'm going to sit because I think it's probably a little easier to have a conversation. So I'm Louisa Horne, and I have a community interest company called Epilog. Community interest companies are an interesting way to have a company in Nova Scotia. It's kind of like a social enterprise in that 60% of your profit has to go back to the community, but it's an easier way of establishing and getting a company that is focused on that kind of social enterprise to be able to operate. And so we do a variety of things, from downsizing and moving people when they're leaving a big home, a big apartment, condo, whatever it might be, going to a smaller one or to long-term care and don't have anybody to help them with that. So we do a lot of moves. And then we do a lot of other things as it relates to end of life, advanced planning, support for persons who have chosen MAID, medical assistance in dying, and need support around that, all the way through to disposition. So I have a funeral license as well. I'm not a licensed funeral director, but I work with a licensed funeral director. So we do funeral services as well, all with a focus on environmental sustainability. So for example, if somebody called and said they wanted to have a funeral and wanted to be embalmed, I'd have to say I can give you some numbers of people to call because we don't do that. But if they're interested in green burial, which we'll talk about when we get to the disposition section, then we can absolutely help them. Or as many people have moved more to cremation, which is not as green, which we'll talk about, but are interested in having it as green as possible, we can also help them. But advanced planning is something that I'm quite passionate about because most people don't do it. And it's one of those things, again, that we don't want to talk about. And so people tend to avoid the conversation and think, well, I'll do it later. Or they think everybody else should do it, but I don't need to because I'm not going to be dying anytime soon. And so I don't need to do all these things. And so it just doesn't happen. And so far too many families and groups that we work with involve people who have no plan. And the people that are left behind are left wondering, well, I wonder what they wanted. Or she told me she wanted this. Well, she told me she wanted that. And these things happen. If any of you have been involved in any of these situations, it can be quite challenging when you don't have those plans laid out. And most people like to have a bit of control. And so if you want to have that control and know that you've got things laid out, then advanced planning is pretty important. Now, because we're online, I don't have the ability to change the slides, so I'm going to have to be kind of giving poor Rhonda. And Rhonda, I should have introduced you. I'm remiss in introducing Rhonda Schofield, who is the ordained minister of St. John's Church, and we're delighted to be hosted by St. John's. And today she's the tech support as well, because when we are online, we can't use the clicker. So we're going to talk a little bit about advanced planning and the various steps of the process, and I tend to like to have things in a simple way of organizing thoughts, and so I talk about the 5 Ds of advanced planning. And the first one is actually can go 2 ways, because that word can be pronounced 2 ways, right? It can be deliberate, that you are deliberately doing it, but it's also deliberate, that there's conversation and discussion. So they both apply as the first step, that this does have to be an intentional thing that you say, okay, I'm just going to do it. I've been talking about it. I've been putting it off. I've been procrastinating, but I'm going to do it. And I'm going to talk to the people that I need to talk about, because it doesn't help to do any of these things if nobody else knows. It's like, if you've done a will or whatever it might be, and it's in your safety deposit box, but nobody knows that, nor do they know where the key is, nor do they have access, well, then you might as well not have done it, because nobody knows anything about it. So that's an important one. Then you've got to work through the developing of the plan, of course, making it happen, make some decisions. It's not something that you're going to do in an hour. We're not going to leave here with an advanced plan by any means, but it's the starting point of helping to make it happen. Discussing, again, is a critical step with whoever. If it's friends, family, if you don't have friends and family that are going to do this, who is it that you're looking to? You may be looking to somebody within a trust company or someone else, but somebody's got to know, and then the documents are key. And there are 4 documents, and that's what we're going to spend most of our time on, is talking about what those 4 documents are. Most people know at least 1 or maybe 2 of them, but maybe not all 4. So we'll just ask you. The first one is, of course, a will, which we'll get to, but what are the others? Yeah, that one. That's the one. That one. Personal directive, as in a health directive. Yep, that's one. Power of attorney. There you go. Those are the 3 that are legal documents. And then there's one more that's not a legal document, but very, very important. Wishes. Oh, good for you. You didn't need to come to this. You already know all this stuff. The wishes document, about the things that you want and the hopes that you have in terms of your end of life and your disposition and so on, which are not necessarily part of any legal document, nor can you legally decree how you want those things done, but they are important things to write down. So we're going to talk about those, and we're going to talk about the people that need to be involved, because all of those, the 4, have people involved. It could be all the same person for all 4, or it could be 4 different people. It's different skills, different tasks that they have to do, so you may or may not choose to have the same person for all 4 documents. So that's a fairly important thing. So that's what we're going to talk about. So we're on to the next one. So single true or false starting point. So that power of attorney that we got to, that first true or false, I have a power of attorney. I don't need a separate personal directive. False. Absolutely false. They are two completely different things. And we'll talk about what a power of attorney is. It really only involves a couple of things, and it's very different from that personal health directive. I'll put all my wishes about MAID, medical assistance in dying, in my personal directive. Absolutely. You can put whatever you want in there, but it doesn't mean it's going to have any effect. And right now, anything you put in a personal directive or anywhere else in advance about your thoughts and wishes about medical assistance in dying mean nothing, because the law does not recognize anything in advance. So, right? So that's an important one. A personal directive is a legal document. Personal health directive, legal document. False, true, it's true. It's true. It is a legal document. Doesn't always appear because, again, it may exist, but if nobody has it, if nobody knows it exists, it's the same as not existing. And unfortunately, we aren't really at a place in our health system where we have electronic records and where all of these things become part of the one record. So if you happen to go to the emergency department in Yarmouth and you don't have a copy with you, it doesn't exist. Right? Or if you go to the emergency department in Halifax and it hasn't been put in your record electronically, or you're in a situation where everybody's moving pretty fast and nobody even looks to check to see, it kind of doesn't exist again either. So it's not always going to be brought to the fore unless you or somebody with you happens to have a copy of it. And we don't all carry them around all the time, but they may or may not be where you need it when you need it.
I do have a question.
Yes.
So this middle one.
Yeah.
My wishes about MAID and my personal directive. Can you just say that if that's again right or wrong?
That is false. Well, you can do it, but it's not going to get you anywhere. You cannot say, here I am today in perfectly good health, and if this, and this happened to me, I want MAID. Not on. Not legal. Can't do that today. Maybe someday in the future. It's certainly a conversation that's happening in Ottawa and elsewhere, and with dignity groups and so on, but at this point it is not a legal thing.
So this is where I get confused. So the personal directive is what happens to me after.
No, personal health directive. It's designating who is going to make health decisions for you when you can't make them for yourself. So you are very sick with whatever, and somebody has to make a decision about whether or not you're going to have a particular surgery, and you're not conscious. You can't do that. They can do that. They can decide, yes, I'm the delegate. I can make this decision. She's appointed me as her health delegate. Yes, we're going to have the surgery. Or, yes, we're going to do absolutely everything we can. Every possible measure we're going to do. Or, nope, we're not going to do every possible measure, and we're not going to do artificial feeding, for example. We'll come to that a little more. But you cannot say that you want to have MAID in the future if these conditions happen. So we'll talk about that one a little more. Okay.
MAID would be in your wishes.
Nope, MAID is only when you need and have the reason and they meet the criteria for MAID. So there are criteria, and you have to have 2 assessments from 2 different either physician or nurse practitioners to determine that you meet those criteria, and they have to say, yes, you do, and then you can move forward with MAID, but not before.
MAID doesn't go in any of these.
Nope, does not go in any of these. Doesn't mean anything.
So an advanced care plan is now a FIT document.
We'll get there. Hang on, hang on. just know that at this point, you cannot request made in advance of having met the criteria for it. That's the key thing when it comes to made. 2 people have to determine that you meet the criteria for made. Okay.
But you could say, I don't want to drag it out, but you could say, if I meet criteria, I'd be happy to have made. No?
No. You have to be conscious and cognitively able at the time that you request made and have those 2 assessments to say, yes, this is what I want. And you have to meet the criteria at that time. Okay, so your personal health directive. Lots of different names for this in different jurisdictions. And thank you for all these resources. I have a few later as well, and there's some great stuff online that we'll talk about. But in different places, they might call them a healthcare directive, they might call it advance directive, they might call it a living will. All of those are different terms for exactly the same thing. And it's subject to the Personal Directives Act. So in Nova Scotia, we tend to call it a personal directive because that's the name of the act, the Personal Directives Act. So if you wanted to know a lot about this act is online, and you could go and read about the Personal Directives Act and find out about the legal document that you need and what's involved in that. It has to be witnessed, it has to be signed, it is a legal document at that point, and it's really about your health care, your personal care decisions, what you would like to have when you are not able to make those decisions on your own. If you're able to make those decisions, you do. If you can't, this is the document and this is the person that's able to say, yes, we want this surgery, yes, we want this medication, or no, we don't. Stop the ongoing treatment. They're the one they can pull the plug at that point. Yes, that is a possibility with this, but that's not the same as made. So a person with the capacity to do that, you're setting out instructions and you're saying that this is what's going to happen only when you don't have the capacity to do it, and you are designating somebody as that substitute decision maker. So that's an important thing to think about. Who is that agent? Who is that decision maker? And who do you want to be the one that says yes or no to the surgery or the medication or the intervention or the treatment or whatever it happens to be, right? So that's that person, that delegate. They're the ones who understand what you want and what kind of values and the conversations that you've had about what's important to you. That's who that delegate is.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yep.
So some people have 45 relatives, some
Yep.
people have hardly any.
Yep.
So what type of person can that be? That delegate?
It can be any person over 19 who you trust to be able to make the decisions for you that hopefully are the decisions you would make for yourself if you could. So yes, it can be a friend, it can be a relative, it can be whoever you trust to do that.
Can be a paid person?
It means like a lawyer. Well, if there's no one else, then yes, but usually it's going to be somebody who can be present and who is involved at the level that when there are decisions to be made in the emergency room or wherever it happens to be, in the long-term care facility, wherever you are, somebody needs to be available to make those decisions for you.
Any friend, relatives are not too keen. Any friend is like 5 years older than I am.
This is an issue.
You know.
This is the issue of people who are isolated, people who are alone, people who are unhoused, people who do not have those connections and who are isolated. And this is why having community is so critical in so many of these things. So yes, that is a very big dilemma.
If you authorize more than one person,
Mm-hmm.
do you authorize them in sequence,
Mm-hmm.
as in this person?
Mm-hmm. And the alternate is, yep,
The alternate is-
because the first person's on a cruise in the Pacific or whatever, this is the backup.
You never authorize 2 people who...
You could, but you're opening yourself up to a challenge.
Problem.
You're opening things up, right?
And if the person that you authorize declines,
Mm-hmm.
when you get to the point they decline, basically you no longer have a personal directive. Is that right?
much.
really dependent on
That's right.
being alive,
Mhm.
willing.
Alive, willing, and somewhat present. So you don't pick your sister in Brazil or your best friend in Scotland or even your cousin in British Columbia, right? Not really helpful. They've got to be on the ground, able to say yes or no to treatment, medication, whatever. Yes, ma'am.
So they're making decisions, yes or no. Can you, in your personal directive, say, if there's a decision to make, either do something or
Mm-hmm.
just don't do anything?
Mm-hmm.
Don't do anything?
That's what this is about. This is laying out that exact thing. And there are all kinds of templates and documents and tools to do this. I usually refer people, well, first of all, to the health authority. There are documents there, and that may be what you've given. I'm not sure which one you've given. It's the one from the province. Okay, so the province has them. I also really like and I'll tell you this one because it applies to all of these, the Nova Scotia Legal Information Society. So if you write that down, that website has templates for darn near everything you could ever want. And one of the sections, I think it's called seniors, although it's probably also in a section called wills and so on. They have templates for health directives, wills, powers of attorney, anything you might need. Now, none of the templates are perfect, and depending on your own situation, they may or may not address everything that you need. And generally, we'd recommend that you have a legal opinion on what you do, just to be that extra careful, but they're better than nothing. And if you have nothing else, and if you don't want to do that, they are free, they are a template, they are legal when you print them out and sign them and have them witnessed. They work. So those are places where you can see wording. Yes, ma'am?
Nova Scotia Legal Information.
Society.
Thank you.
Okay, Rhonda. So what are we talking about? For personal directive, it's about having a decision maker when you no longer have capacity. So what's capacity? Understand information relevant to the decision making, the personal care, and understand the consequences of the decision. That's having capacity. So that's a treatment, an intervention, understanding the purpose of the treatment or intervention, and the risks involved. So if you are somewhat impaired by whatever situation you're in, health-wise, and you can't, somebody's trying to explain, okay, here are the options, we could do this or this, and here are the risks, and here's what this means, and you cannot understand all that, and you cannot respond to that, you do not have capacity. So that's where capacity comes in. You have to be able to understand the treatment, the risks, and the purpose. Yep. No, I don't think they have to be in person, but they have to be pretty connected. So they could be Zoomed or whatever. They're not right here. Yeah, but they've got to be involved and know what's going on, and they have to have capacity, right? So they have to be able to say, yes, I understand the risk of this, and yes, I understand we have these two options for treatment. Here's the one I think we should go with because this is what I think she would want, and this is what. This is why alternates in all of these are so important, right? Your personal care, that's around your health care, your treatment. So that's everything about where you are, where you want to live, what kind of clothing you like, what kind of activities you want to have around you, what kind of support you want to have. That's all the general kind of stuff, right? Next one. So who do you choose? Someone who knows you and that you trust. That's the first thing. They know what you would want, and they can make tough decisions. So, as an example, I have a couple of daughters. I don't think either one of them could make this kind of a tough decision, so I didn't choose either one of them. Right? I have a son-in-law that would say, yep, let me see, what did she say? And we've talked about it, and I've said this is the deal. Here's what I think, here's what I want. Done. And he will be able to do that. They know your values, they know your beliefs, they understand what's important to you. So if there's a decision to make that, they're not just sure and it's not written out, it's not a really clear thing, but they're being asked to make this decision, they hopefully understand your values and beliefs well enough that they can feel confident, well, I'm basically sure that she wouldn't want that, and I'm basically sure that, this would be what she would choose. They've got to know you, hopefully, well enough to be able to do that. So that's where you get in a little trouble, Diane. If somebody that's, that's a paid professional, so to speak, they've got to go by what you've written down and what you've talked to them about. And if the scenario happens to be a little different for some reason, no, that's the challenge. But, we have to do what we have to do. Well, if you're clear enough in your language to say, if these kinds of scenarios and circumstances occur, then I would not want further treatment. Right? That's part of the wording in terms of what you're going to say. Hi there. Come on in. Come on in. No problem. And they're supposed to follow your most current wishes, right? Same as a will or whatever. It's the most current. You may have done a couple of different versions of these. Okay, Rhonda. So these are some of the things that you might lay out. And these are the kinds of things that would be in the templates that you would see where you're going to say, what's important to you? Is this really important? Is it a little bit important? Is it not? These are the kinds of things that will help guide your thinking about what you're going to write down. Is it quality or quantity of life? That's a toughie right at the beginning, right? Pardon me? Of course. Yeah. Is it, living as long as possible? That's the quantity or quantity. Absolutely. Spiritual beliefs and traditions. How important is that in the decision making? Autonomy, mentally alert, time with family, time in nature, volunteering, pets. All of these things come into your thinking about how you describe what you want in an advanced directive, right? So, if somebody's identity and somebody's life is totally focused on being active outdoors, and, every day they're somewhere outdoors, and that's the key thing in their life, and they're in a situation where they're not going to be able to do that anymore. They can still, they could take up playing cards. Well, they're not going to take up playing cards. They could stay home and watch TV. They're not going to stay home and watch TV. Their life is focused on outdoors and nature. That's going to be a very predominant thing. And in the written document and in the conversation, hopefully that person has said, if I can't get outside, if I'm stuck indoors all the time, I don't play cards, I don't read, I don't watch TV, there's nothing left. Then that's part of your decision making. Those are the kinds of things that this helps you to think about. Next one. What does personal care include? And I mentioned this earlier. It's all those things. Right? Clothing, comfort measures, nutrition, shelter, support services. So again, you can be thinking about the details of all of those and what's important to you. And that's why the conversations and understanding values and beliefs are so, so important. You're going to say something. The templates mostly have a fill-in-the-blank section and a little preamble that will say, think about your values and think about what's important to you. It may not be as explicit as this one is, but if you look at a few of them, which I would recommend that you do, they will all have some slightly different prompts and questions and things to think about that are important for your scenario. Could be, yeah, yeah.
I'd be willing to go to long-term care,
Yep.
that's what that.
Yep, but it also applies, even if you're independently living and getting a little bit of help, somebody's coming in a couple of times a week, maybe for a certain period of time, as we think about the different transitions that we have of being completely independent to maybe being partially independent with some support, to being almost fully supported, to being completely fully supported, right? There's phases there that a lot of people go through. We don't all go through them in that way, but you kind of want to think about what are the options in all of those cases.
So if somebody comes into the emergency room, an old person, with broken leg, and they're also, they're unconscious or something,
They'd try and find somebody to help them, but if there's nobody around, they can't reach anybody, they're going to do what they can to treat that person. So I had a 90-something-year-old aunt that was in that scenario who broke her hip. Well, we're gonna do a hip replacement. This is insane. There's no reason to do this. This is going to be worse than the treatment's worse than the condition at that point. And she's starting pneumonia and all these things. No, we have to do it because she didn't have children. There wasn't any clarity. We couldn't get it all figured out. This is about 10 years ago now. So they gave her a hip replacement, and 3 days later she died in agony from that. That was the process. Had she had a personal health directive that named me or one of my cousins, we may have been able to make a different choice. But we couldn't. So yeah, it's important to have. But it's not always going to apply because, again, remember, you're in Yarmouth. They don't have a copy of it. They're going to do what they have to do to set your leg and do whatever else in most cases. It gets a little fuzzy at times, but that's the reality. Okay, health interventions to consider. And you can lay out in your health directive, and I know you probably can't read all of this because it's a little smaller than usual, but I put it all on here because it lays out all of the kinds of things that you can be specific about in a health directive. Everything from you want antibiotics, you don't want antibiotics. You want a blood transfusion, under no circumstances do I want a blood transfusion. I want to have a defibrillator or I don't. I absolutely want to be intubated for nutrition or under no circumstances am I to have a feeding tube. If you think it's going to help, radiation, yep, that'd be good, or no, don't want to go through it. Resuscitation, that's a big one. The DNRs, do not resuscitate, or yep, go for it. Break ribs, do whatever you need to do. If you think there's a chance, do it, or don't. All of those are things that you may have a view on that you want to be specific about. So I would say, for example, under no circumstances, if there is no strong opinion that whatever the situation is going to lead to recovery to the point of independence, no feeding tube. Not happening, right? You can say that.
So I'm asking again, can we get a copy
Sure.
of this?
Yeah, I can give you.
Maybe, I don't know, email this to us.
Yes, ma'am.
It's very detailed.
It is detailed.
Thank you.
I will do that.
I'm curious, Louisa, how the directive actually works in practice,
Mhm.
as in you have one.
Mhm.
It is the agent's responsibility to get that and show up,
Mhm.
basically.
Pretty much.
Show up somehow and then advocate for it.
That may well be the scenario.
So you don't, I mean.
So I have a copy in my file, so I took it to the family doctor, but I'm privileged, I have a family doctor. I took it to the family doctor, paper copy. They were going to scan it. I have no idea where it's ended up. Over time, as we move to a single record and everything's scanned, one would hope that there's a box that in the ER,
If
it's
you
going to
go
pop
to
up.
hospital,
Yeah.
I mean, I've never been very clear about this, and if you have a family doctor so far, that's what I do.
Mhm.
Are they involved anyway?
Well, that's where your record, that's where the record piece comes in, that's where you could take it to have it added to your record. So you would hope. Now, having a son-in-law who's an emergency physician, I've said, how often do you see these and how often do you go looking? He says there's usually not time, and unless there's somebody right there with it, you don't even know if you're in an emergency situation.
So
But
let's set emergency
Yep.
aside.
Yep.
Maybe there are decisions, there's a bit more time.
yeah,
Is the doctor proposing a treatment? Are there any obligation to search out this document? Or, again, it's
not
very
really.
much the agent needs to be
Somebody's got to be there.
waving it at them. And then is the doctor under an obligation to read through it?
Under an obligation, if you have a signed legal document, to have that be part of the conversation, absolutely, yes.
Okay.
But it is not necessarily going to show up on your record, and unless somebody does have a copy, nobody's going to go looking.
Is there any other way to put it on your record?
Not at this point in time when we don't have single records, is there? It depends on what kind of situation you're in, right? So if you go to a nursing home, you're going to have to sign forms. You have to sign for treatments, somebody does, or if you go through emergency, you might not. No. No, no. If you're in a nursing home, you would have to sign something, and you would have to have your records, you'd have to have your DNRs sorted out. So people sometimes wonder, how come so many people at Northwood died during COVID? Right? Why was that? Well, those people all had DNRs. Right? Do not resuscitate. So when they got pneumonia, or they had COVID, or they were very sick, that they had signed that. Right? More so than the general public, who would not have had a DNR in place that somebody knew where it was, because they obviously know where it is, right? It's in your file when you go in, right? As soon as you go in, you're going to sign one.
Is there anything comparable to, what do you call it, where you wear information?
Oh, medical alert? Yeah.
Yes, is there anything comparable that could have a QR code that's
Good idea. Good idea, but I don't think so. No. Good idea. It's a legal document. Okay, let's keep going. All right, it's a good idea. Could tattoo it, right? I mean, we do better with our pets. When we inject the little, put the little thing in that's got the chip. Yeah, get a chip. And it's still, the person's, again, I'll use my Yarmouth scenario. For some reason, they're in Yarmouth this weekend. Who knows? Yeah, yeah, it is. Okay, that's it for directives. Few true and falses about wills. I have a power of attorney, she can handle everything. No, right, that's correct. Good point. Completely separate. We'll come back to that. Wait a minute, did we miss power of attorney? Why are we on will? What was number 2? Did we miss one, Rhonda? Oh, must have got out of order. Okay, okay. If I don't have a will, my estate will just be divided up among my children anyway, so I don't need one. No, also false. Also false. Bad idea and false. I updated my will in 2000 and it's safe in my safety deposit box, so I'm good. No, 2 things wrong with that. What are the 2 things wrong with that? Too old. Too old. Somebody could easily challenge it. Too old. And it's in your safety deposit box. Oh, that would be a problem. Yes. You can't even get to it. Is. Yeah. And does anybody have the key? And do they have the key? And if they're not named on it, how long is it going to take for them to get access? And now we're a couple of weeks out from when you died. Not helpful. Anything over about 10 years, people can start to say, that was then, this is now. So I wouldn't want one more than 10 years old, that's for sure. Or when something has changed, right? That's the immediate one, but people often don't. So what changes? Well, the person you named died. They're gone. You haven't updated it since then. Or your alternate moved to Brazil. Or your main asset that you had listed no longer exists. Or you now have this other even bigger asset that isn't listed in there. Right? Any of those kind of changes are pretty critical times to do something, but otherwise just the length of time. I don't want to spend money on a will and only a lawyer can create one. False, right. The templates on the Legal Information Society are perfectly fine, particularly for simple situations where there isn't a lot of, not a lot of complications. If there are, it's worth spending some money on a lawyer, if you can. I have everything in multiple names, so there shouldn't be any need for probate. People have this big thing about probate court. It's all, I got multiple names on all the accounts and whatever you own, so shouldn't be a problem. False. If you have property, if you have things, you're going to probate, and it's not that big of a deal. We'll get to that. 50% of Canadians do not have a will, 70% of people between 35 and 44 don't have one, and 35% of people over 55 don't have one. That's true. Those are true stats. Didn't make that up. That's all true. So definitions again. There is a Probate Act. So if you want to read all the details, it's all there. So you got your will. That's the document that says what you want done with your estate. It's not a requirement that you have one, but it's a really good idea. Right? And once you have one, it is a legal document. What is your estate? That's all your stuff. Whatever you have, whatever assets you have, house, land, money, jewelry, art, all of it forms part of your estate. Your executor, and this is the important person for this one, that's the person you name to make sure that everything you said you want actually happens. They're in charge at that point. They make the decisions, and their role is to make sure they follow them. And in fact, part of what probate does is to ensure that that person does follow your wishes. So you got to trust them, again. The testator is the person who makes the will. That's you when you make one. Intestate, when you hear that word, means somebody that died without one. Right? That's all that means. And the beneficiaries are obviously the people or the charities or the whatever that you name to have those gifts and assets after you die, if there are any. So those are the key things. Why do you need one? Pretty obvious. Peace of mind, that control thing that you know that things are taken care of. You're not leaving a mess. That's usually the reason people do it. As I say, I don't want to leave a mess for people, and they don't want it to just be the provincial trustee that has to step in and make decisions and do things. They want to know that everything is in order, and you have a particular wish that somebody, some group, some organization, some charity is going to benefit from what you have, and you want to give some of your belongings to somebody who wouldn't otherwise be legally eligible to get it. So let's say you don't have a will, then, but you have a child or you have a sibling or whatever your next of kin is, you don't want them to have it. Well, then you better have a will, because otherwise it's going to go to the people as listed in order of who is eligible. So you have a common law partner, they get nothing if you don't have a will. You have friends, you have relatives through marriage of other people you want. If you want them to have it, you best have it in your will. You're going to name people to look after children if you have children, or pets even. Who's going to take care of them? Do they know this? No surprises. And you're going to arrange how that's all going to happen. So that's the purpose, and you want to avoid, most people want to avoid disputes. And I can tell you it's extremely important to talk about this to the people that you've chosen, just as it is with the health directive. The executor and the alternate executor are also important to talk to. We can go to the next one. I think that's what that is. Rhonda? Oh yeah, guys, this was my other little reminder. Death brings out the best and the worst in families. And we probably all know stories of things that have happened. Next one. So if you don't have a valid will, then the probate court will have to name an administrator. Somebody's got to make some decisions, and somebody's got to be in charge here, and somebody's got to figure out how things are going to happen. So that's where probate will step in to name an administrator if you don't have one. And they're going to determine how your property is distributed based on the Act. And the Act lays out how relatives are in order of how things are distributed. That's all there. And so, there's rules about if you don't have a will, you have a spouse, you have children. There's rules about who gets how much. It's laid out. It's not flexible at that point. It's going to lay out if they survive you. One survives, one doesn't. There's one child, there's 3 children. It's all laid out. It's all going to be determined by the law. And that just has a few more of the details of it, but we won't take the time to go through it. But there's no protection for common law spouses unless they're registered. There's no protection for stepchildren. There's no protection for grandchildren if they're not named. Right? So that's important. Next one. Probate. This is the thing. Everybody thinks you've got to try and do things so you avoid probate. It's not that big of a deal, and it is an oversight that makes sure that things are properly done. So in Nova Scotia, it's the Supreme Court that oversees it. And they grant the authority to the person who's going to be administering, and they sign off that everything was done. So I have one that my husband had an adult son who had died a couple of years ago. I was the alternate, did not know that, didn't bother to ever tell me. And his brother, who he chose, declined. So if you're an executor, you can decline to be the executor. And he declined, so it came to me. I could have declined, and it would have gone to the provincial trustee, but I chose not to do that. And so that's 5 years now, and probate's this week. It's taken 5 years because there were some complications with it, but it hasn't been fun. And it's a long process, but the file that went to probate is, I swear, this thick that they have. And I have to be available all afternoon on Wednesday when it goes to probate, because they have to be able to reach me if they have a question. And if they can't reach me, it's going to be a problem. So I have to sit by the phone while they do this to ensure that they're satisfied with everything that we've provided to show that everything happened as it should. And that's their role. And then they sign off and say, it's done. What's left goes to the beneficiary, and we're done. The authority is taken care of. Next one. You have to list them in your will. They're not, if you don't have a will, they don't get anything. So it's not that expensive. Everybody thinks, oh my God, probate's going to take it all. But if you're talking about a small estate under $10,000, we're looking at $85, right? That's the probate fee. And then it goes up, of course. But even if it was an estate over $100,000, you're looking at $1,000 basically, plus $17 for every 1,000 over that. So it's not like probate's taken everything. You sometimes hear that, oh my God, the government's going to take it all. No, they're not. It's not that huge. So I think it's important that people know that. And it hasn't changed since 2015, 1.7%. So who do you choose? Again, it has to be an adult. It has to be ideally in Nova Scotia. That's not a legal requirement, but it sure helps if they are. And again, this is somebody who's trustworthy, that you know are going to do what you've said, and that they're going to follow your wishes. They have to follow your wishes in terms of where your stuff goes. So if you said you're going to give, $1,000 to the cat shelter, they have to show the probate court that the $1,000 went to the cat shelter. They can't say, I don't like cats, I'm going to give it to the dogs, whatever. They can't do that. They have to do what you said. What they don't have to do, however, relates to disposition. So if you said, I want a green burial, they can say, yeah, no, costs too much, we're going to cremate, get it over with, I don't care, get it done, cremate them tomorrow. They can do that. That is not subject to your will. When you die, you are now not able to make or have a decision about that whole. So you got to make sure that your executor is somebody that's going to follow what you want, right? Because they have to. Yeah, but they could still say, doesn't matter. I don't have to do that. They might not know that you've paid for the services in advance. They might not have any clue. And you might be on vacation in Disney World. And they're going to say, we're not paying $50,000 to fly her back just so she can have a green burial. Cremate her down there. That can happen. So the lot that you bought in, Kentville, never use it. That happens all the time. There are lots in cemeteries everywhere that people don't know about, that people died somewhere else and didn't have the chance to use, and their family doesn't know there's still empty spaces. Because who talks about that? Who says, oh, don't forget, we've got a family plot in Sydney, and there's 8 spots, and 3 of them are left, and those are for you. Don't forget that. I'm not going to Sydney. I moved to British Columbia. I'm staying in British Columbia. Well, now who knows? Nobody. So that's important. Because you don't have legal stand anymore. You're dead. Right? You are a corpse at this point, and your executor controls what happens to that.
Right, but you tell the executor, I want this beautiful book to go to
They have to do that.
They have to do that.
Yep.
Like, I want my body to go in this hole. They don't have to do that.
Well, here's the thing. Somebody dies today. This is Monday. What's going to happen? Somebody's going to do what today? Be executor next again. They're going to call a funeral home. They may not know where the will is yet. They may not have seen the will. It may be in the safety deposit box and nobody's going to get it for at least 10 days because they got to go through the process of probate to get permission to open get the bank to open the safety deposit box for them. So it's not as easy as you think. So this person has to be a person that you trust to follow your instructions. They've got to be organized. They've got to be able to deal with lawyers potentially, with the bank, with the car leasing company, with your insurance company, with the cemetery, with your finance person. They got to be able to deal with all of that stuff. So you want somebody who's, got a little bit of skill, hopefully, and can do that. And if you don't have anybody, there are trust departments with all the major banks. They do that for a percentage or fee, and it's a good option if there's nobody else to do it, if you have the resources to do that. Otherwise, you got to figure out who's going to be able to do that work for you. And it doesn't have to be the same person as the other one. Yes, ma'am. You can hire whoever you want if yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely, you can. Sorry, what was that? I'm your executor. Yeah. And?
Let's say you were having trouble
Yep.
with all the folks.
Yep.
You could always say,
Yep.
look, I have an option of going to a trust company.
Yep.
Now, are we going to try to deal with this now, or are
Yep.
we going to deal with this after?
I can hire whoever I want, assuming the resources are there to pay for it. So this one that I just am finishing, this 5-year treat that I had, it involved U.S. taxes. So I had to hire a U.S. tax accountant because I could not do anything with that. So now, had the money not been there to pay them, the estate would have been bankrupt and the beneficiaries that were named would get nothing. Because the first thing that has to happen is you have to deal with all of the financial arrangements and the bills that are owing and the bills that have to be paid or whatever else. That's got to be done first before, your grandchild gets the $1,000 for school. That's only going to happen once everything else is done. So it's not you got to think about who is that person. And the reason that I ended up with this one is that the brother, who was the first executor, said, I can't handle this. Like, this is going to be a nightmare. I'm not doing this. I can't handle it. Over to you.
So the trust department of a bank could be an executor
Yep.
for the will.
Yep.
Do they have a fee structure? Is
Sure.
there a percentage?
Yeah. Yeah. They're all a little different, but yeah, they charge a fee.
Okay, so maybe I'll ask this other question now. So a TFSA, I have a small TFSA.
Yeah.
And I have a beneficiary.
Yep.
So does that go into my estate?
Yeah, well, it would be listed as one of your assets, yeah. That's an asset that you would, make sure you want to list it there so people know that you have it, right? Because otherwise, somebody might not know that you even have it.
I guess I thought that some money, like TFSA,
Mm-hmm.
with beneficiary,
Yep.
that doesn't enter the estate.
Well,
You should talk to your bank and get some.
yeah,
I don't want to pay
it's
4% or 8%.
No.
15% on this.
No, you wouldn't.
TFSA.
No, you wouldn't on that, but it's important that they know that that's there.
Okay.
Right. Okay. So you want to pick the right person. So is it an honor or a responsibility or a pain in the you-know-what to be an executor? Well, this is what they have to do. They've got to get probate if it's needed, so they got to go through that process. They've got to secure the assets. They got to make sure your taxes are all paid. They've got to have the inventory. They've got to contact health insurance, other insurance that you might have. You've got a leased car. They got to do all that. They got to make sure all your debts are paid. They've got to make sure you get out of your lease of your apartment if you have one, or whatever you might need for that. They might have to sell the house if you have a house that has to be sold. They've got to make sure that there are no claims against the estate. That's kind of a public thing that has to happen for estates, to make sure that there's no other bills that you don't know about. Can take a while. I didn't know what bills this guy had. I had no clue. I didn't know what he had. I didn't know I was going to be doing this. And then you've got to figure out how you're going to pay all those and keep track of all the accounting. So it's got to be a person that can do that. Now, if you have no estate, really, to speak of, and it's very simple, well, it's not that big of a deal. But if there is stuff, you need to know. It's not a trivial matter. Okay. Now this, you're not intended to read it, but this is a checklist that is available on the website for Scotiabank, for example. And I just wanted you to see the number of things that they have with check boxes of things that need to happen. So that's, you can find these kinds of things online. Any of the banks would have these kind of checklists for estate management. But it gives you kind of a good indication of the sorts of things that you need to be able to have somebody do. So I didn't mean for you to read it. I meant for you to see there's a lot of stuff there. And then this is, I think, an important thing that everybody should do, is to have your stuff in order. Have a binder, a file folder, a something that people that need to know where stuff is, and you put a copy of everything that is significant in that folder so that it's all together. Because I can tell you, it is not the time for people to be trying to find stuff like I was, going through an apartment that I had never been in, to empty it and find paperwork and figure out how was I going to do US taxes for the last 6 years, etc., when you don't know anything about the scenario. So you want to have that stuff in order. An example being, when somebody dies, if they've paid into Canada Pension Plan, there's a death benefit, $2,500 that everybody gets if you've paid into Canada Benefit or Canada Pension. But they got to have paperwork. They've got to have copies of things. They've got to have a copy of your social insurance number and a copy of your identification. And if you've been married, a copy of your marriage certificate. Well, I can tell you, I've sat with people at their table organizing a funeral and then said, so any idea where your marriage certificate might be? Because we're going to need that to do the claim for Canada Pension. No clue. No clue. Canada Pension Plan claim for the $2,500 death benefit. You don't need it. If you're never married, it's okay. But if you are married, you must have a copy of your marriage certificate to go with the application for that death benefit. And an awful lot of people who've been married a really long time have no idea where that document might be. And so then I have to say, well, the next week or so, when you feel up to it, we need to go to Vital Statistics and get a copy of that, or we need to write to whoever in whatever geographic area and get it. So get that stuff. Insurance policies, all these things. Don't you put it in the folder. It's likely going to be needed for something.
Can you suggest where to get a copy of this list?
I'll give it to you.
Is this the fourth document?
No, this is the third. It was supposed to be third. For some reason, my slide on power of attorney disappeared, but I'll talk about that one in a minute. So the first one was the health directive, then the will.
It is one of those.
Yeah, it's one of them. It's one of them. Okay, so put all this stuff in your binder. The other thing you want to have, and this is a tricky one, because obviously we want passwords to be secure, but somebody needs to know how to get at your passwords. So you have to figure out how that's going to be, because I can tell you from experience that going to a funeral home to get a fingerprint from somebody to open their phone just before the cremation is not the ideal scenario.
Does it happen?
No, I had to do that.
Oh my God.
Because the thought was everything is stored in his phone. It's all in his cell phone. Yesterday, he changed the password to his cell phone and didn't give that.
Oh my goodness me.
So what are we going to do? We need that fingerprint. I don't know about that, but I tell you, I don't want to do it again. So don't do that. Make sure people know where they are. Okay, Nova Scotia Green Slate. I brought one of these. I have a lot of them, but I've got a few on the table over there. This is something that, oh, piece of paper fell out, that the province has. It's not well known. Have you seen them? Have you seen these green sleeves? No. The province has them, and I'll just grab one of the ones I've got over here because it's got the information in it. And they're trying, I think, to get people, yeah, this one has the piece of paper. It's a free thing. They're trying to get people, like there's states, for example, some of them have these little vials that have a magnet on them, and you're supposed to put it on your fridge with where to find stuff. So if the emergency people come in, they know where it is. This is from the Nova Scotia Health Authority, and it's a place to put some advanced documents. And the idea is that they would like to have these become well-known so that if the ambulance people come in or whatever, they know to look for this. Now, I don't know how that's going to go because I don't know that everybody's going to have it in the same place. Do you put it in the freezer? Where do you put it? But really, do people look there? I mean, we don't really have a system to do that. But these are available, and there's a few little, bits of information with it, and the province gives them out, and it's through the palliative care folks. But I just don't know, Mary Ellen, if this is something that, has... I mean, we'd have to have an awful lot of people do it, and we'd have to have an awful lot of training for emergency measures people, and we'd have to have some kind of agreement about where's it going to be, and I don't see that happening anytime soon. Starting to, yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't know.
Well, because you can't say put it in by your front door, because everyone needs,
I don't know.
that's not uniform.
It's a good idea. It just needs some work in terms of how does it actually happen. But it is a program of the province called Green Sleeve, and I have a few of them over there if you want to take one. But whatever. Have the stuff somewhere that all of these things are there. Okay, next one. End-of-life wishes. This is the fourth one that's important that we'll talk about a little bit. So end-of-life wishes must be legally followed. I already gave you a clue on that. No, they do not have to legally be followed. But your values and beliefs are the foundation of your end-of-life wishes. That is true. Reflecting on and sharing your end-of-life wishes is a gift to those who will implement them. Absolutely true. People need to know that. Next one. So these are all these things around your values, your end-of-life care, and after-death care, and what you wish to have happen. So remember I said your executor could say, no, we're not going to bring her back from Florida, cremate her down there, even though you said you wanted a green burial. This is where you put those wishes and need somebody that you trust to have this information who's going to follow it. So who's going to be the one that makes sure that you have the green dress on and not the red dress on for your viewing if you wanted to have a viewing? Or who's going to know that you absolutely do not want a viewing? Or who's going to know that it's really important that if you're in the hospital and you're in the final days and it's pretty known, you really want this quiet music playing. You don't want 20 people in the room, and you don't want all kinds of commotion. You just want quiet, and this is your favorite music. And if there's a service at the end, this is your favorite reading and your favorite poem, and you'd really like so-and-so to sing. Where's all that? This is where that is. That's all wishes. And it can be as detailed as you want. Here's my obituary already written. Here's the list of the order of service that I want. And here's who I hope is available to read and sing and play the violin. And I want to wear the blue dress. All that stuff. Or I don't. Whatever. That's all of that kind of stuff. So this is, again, where those values about what's important to you need to be clear and shared. And all of your faith views and all of the things that you want to have taken into account are known and written down somewhere, right to the point of, the lot in Sydney still has a couple of spots. Here's the place that I'd like you to order a stone. I like the ones with doves. I don't want one with an angel. Whatever. You can put all that stuff in this document and hope that the person that you've shared it with follows it. That's all there. And where you want donations. right? Not everybody knows that. When all the donations to the cat shelter or whatever, that's important. And it also covers, as I said, those non-medical things. You might even say, here are the pictures that I want on display, or here's the picture to use in the paper, if there is a paper at the time that publishes anything. Here's the picture I want to use. You can put all of that, and my favorite in him. That's all there. And what do you want done when you die? Here's who to call. Here's who I would like you to call first. Here's who I don't want you to call. Here's what I'd like to have happen in terms of rituals or special care. Here's who I'd like to have come first, or here's who I'd like to have there at the time, if that's possible. All of those things are potentially there. And the rules, there are no rules when it comes to the ritual or funeral. That is not a legal thing like a wedding is a legal document. A funeral is not. So there are no particular rules. You don't have to have one. There's no particular license involved for who is involved in the rituals that you may have. There's no rules about the rituals. We have lots of customs. We have lots of traditions. We have lots of faith-based, wonderful opportunities, but there's no rules. You can decide. And then you also lay out some of the practicalities of where you'd like the party to be, if there is one, who to call for pallbearers, if there's a need for pallbearers, all those things. Allergic to flowers, please don't have any flowers, whatever. You can put all that in there. Or, daisies are my favorite. I really only want a couple of daisies. Don't waste any money. Please tell people not to spend money on flowers, but to give it to the cat shelter. Right? That's where you say that. What could go wrong? Right, there's lots of things that could still go wrong, but that's kind of the key thing. Now, for some reason, power of attorney disappeared. I don't know what digital gremlins did that, but I'll just tell you, power of attorney, also a legal document, named power of attorney with an alternate, only in effect until you die. Your last breath, power of attorney's gone out the window. And it is really for that alternate decision maker for things related to finance and legalities. And it can be temporary or it can be enduring. So for example, if you today in perfect health are going on a 3-month cruise in the Caribbean, you might say, I'm naming so-and-so as my power of attorney for the next 3 months while I'm away. They're going to pay my rent. They're going to make sure my check gets deposited every month. And if, the house floods and they have to call and pay for a new roof, they can do that from my bank account for the next 3 months. You can do it that specific. Or you have an enduring one that you say, this person is my power of attorney to make financial and legal decisions for me in the case of my inability to do so, which could be temporary or longer term. So you might be sick and in the hospital and unconscious for a week, they're on deck. And then when you're conscious again, they're off deck. Right? So it comes and goes. So that person needs to be somebody who can deal with financial and legal things. Could be a different person than all the others. But legal document and important to have. So health delegate, power of attorney, will, legal, wishes, what kind of flowers, not legal.
Is there any, when my mother, very close to the end of her life, when she was trying to establish a power of attorney in the UK, they had recently introduced legislation where there was a very long waiting period before that came into effect. Is that the case here?
No.
It's instant.
Yeah. Yeah. Get her signed, get it witnessed.
I believe it was 7 months.
Oh my gosh.
Something crazy.
No, as far as I know, there are no delays here for this.
Because there is so much wrongdoing around power of attorney.
Yep. So realize that when you name somebody as a power of attorney, they can clean out your bank account. You go on vacation, they can sell your house if you've given that right to them to act for you in financial and legal matters. And it happens. do this. Mhm.
So I'm in a common law relationship.
Mhm.
So as far as all this goes, as long as I'm named and in my will.
It's got to be in the will because you have no rights otherwise. So keep in mind, neither of you have rights unless you are a registered domestic partnership. There is nothing that's going to be a benefit to anybody.
So what's a registered domestic?
That's saying you have to register with the province to say, I am in a common law relationship and this is my domestic partner. Otherwise, they don't exist. So this,
When I do my taxes, that's separate.
yeah, separate. Yeah, taxes
So
are
that
separate.
recognized.
Yeah,
Okay.
separate.
Registered domestic.
Yep, registered domestic partnership. Otherwise, you don't exist. So this one that I'm just dealing with that ends this week, there was a common law partner out of the apartment the next week, gone, gotta go. No right to stay, not on the lease, no right to one item in the apartment, nothing. That's the reality. Mm-mm. Mm-mm. Nope.
So that's because the person didn't have a will.
No, he had a will. He had a will, but he didn't put her, he hadn't updated it in the last little while. Yeah, yeah. That helps. That helps. That helps. Okay. So this was just a slide to say, if you don't want to talk about this, what can you do? And these are the conversations that you have to have that nobody wants to have over Thanksgiving dinner. But you need to. And these are the kinds of conversations with the friends and family that you want to be having. And so these were just some starters of, I was thinking about this the other day, or I read a book, or I was talking to somebody, I was thinking about what happened when Aunt Ethel died, and all of this stuff was there, and how it was handled. Can we set some time to talk about it, right? You gotta do that. You just have to do it. Okay, we're gonna go on to the next one. I'm not gonna spend a lot of time. Any other questions about this before we talk about the joys of disposition?
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
I gave up on my safety deposit box.
I did too. Yep, me too.
So my will is, I know I got to do some stuff. My will is with the lawyer. And I got a copy of the lawyer. So what's the best thing to do? Give my two executives the will now.
Mhm.
Tell them that it's with the lawyer and who the lawyer
Mhm.
is. Is
Mhm.
that good?
I would. Yep.
Is that a good enough
Yep.
alternate to a safety deposit box?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep, I would do that.
Put it in your freezer.
Yeah, put it in your freezer.
Oh, Lord. Have you seen this?
In between the blueberries and the whatever. Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Howard.
Oh.
In the event, just going back to being the executor and there is a deficit at the end,
Mhm.
executor
No.
responsible.
No. As long as there's been no indication of wrongdoing. If there was an indication of wrongdoing, that's a different story. But otherwise, an estate can be bankrupt. So this one that I'm dealing with, you have to pay bills in order. There's a certain sort of order of things you have to pay. So you had to make sure the apartment rent was paid, and you had to get out of the car lease right away and have that paid off and do some of those things, and the credit card and the power bill and the mobile phone bill and all those things that have to be paid. You got to do that. Then we had to file the U.S. taxes. And in that case, you have no idea for the 2 years that you wait for the IRS to get back to you whether or not there's going to be a penalty or tax owing. Nothing can happen. Nothing can come out of the bank account. Nothing can be done until you know that that's dealt with. It was possible in this particular case that the U.S. Tax Department could have put an enormous penalty, they can choose, for lack of filing of taxes, which is what had happened. In the end, they did not, but they could have, and it could have bankrupted the estate at that point. Right? If the estate was bankrupt, we're done. It's bankrupt, file for bankruptcy as the estate, and everything's over. That could have happened. They did not put a penalty, and so we didn't have to do that. But it was always an option. And so during that time, probate would look to see any money going in and out of that. So I had to provide every month a bank statement to show nothing happened. Right? Got to do that. So can't have any wrongdoing. Okay, change of topic. Disposition. I love the fact that we use this word disposition. What's the root word of disposition? Right, we don't talk about dispose. We don't dispose of bodies, but in fact we do. But we choose to use the word disposition because somehow it sounds better. And there's really 4 different ways that we can do that. The 4 elements of fire, water, earth, and air. Some more than others. So let's look at the first one. Air is the first one, and we don't do it here. Sky burial is possible in Tibet, for example, where bodies can be put in trees or on the tops of mountains to decompose and to become part of the life cycle of other creatures, but we don't do that. But it is possible, and usually somebody asks, can't you just do that? No, you can't. It is not legal here. Nice one. There is, however, in Canada, one body farm where bodies are put out in the open to decompose, and it's at the Université du Québec à Trois-Rivières, where there is a research program that's looking at decomposition of bodies, because as you can imagine, when there are forensic studies done and a body is found, somebody's got to be able to say, well, that's been there at least 6 months, or no, that's been there for 5 years. So they're studying that. But they only take about 10 a year. So you're probably not going to have the option to be part of the body farm, but it does exist, and there are people that study that. Otherwise, there's no just being out in the open. Okay. Water. There is an option there. Let's look at the next one to see what can we do in water. So you can be buried at sea. That's legal, but you got to plan ahead. It's not something that somebody can just say, oh, died today, figure it out, we're going to do it next week. No can do. A lot of paperwork involved. You got to go through Canada Environment Protection. You got to get environment and climate change. You got to fill out a lot of forms, and you've got to then get permission to be able to do it legally as a body. This is not cremated remains. This is a body. So it can be done, but it's not easy. In Halifax, they used to do burial at sea on Battle of the Atlantic Sunday off the Sackville. I attended one of those one time, and that was possible, and that was through the military connection there. But it's not very common, but if somebody really wanted to do it, you could do it.
Are they cremated?
No, these are full bodies in this case.
Have they been frozen or just?
No. Well, they could have been probably embalmed if you want to wait a while, but they would have arranged it in advance. The thing is, it's not something you can do immediately. You've got to have time.
It's only 1 day a year then?
For the Battle of the Atlantic Sunday, yeah, they only had the 1 day, so they would have had embalmed bodies, because embalmed bodies will last forever.
So therefore the embalmed body is the ocean.
That's correct. That is correct. Okay, now, this is another really exciting option. People think it's just so fabulous, and this is very environmental. Not. And this is cremated remains, where cremated remains can be mixed with things like concrete and put in shapes and balls to become part of a reef. And this is possible. This is legal in Canada. It happens in BC. It's apparently going to be happening here. And the gimmick, I will say, so you sort of see how I feel about this, is that this is somehow making yourself part of the regeneration of coral reefs. So you can decide how green that is. But some people do this. And lots of people were going to the US from Canada to become part of this. And it's very expensive, and I don't know why you would do it, but you can. So that's another water one. The other thing that involves water that is becoming much more well-known and common, because that guy at the top there, Desmond Tutu, chose this option. And there are a couple of names for it, 5 in fact, that I know of. And the one that's most commonly used is aquamation, to kind of tie into cremation, so people kind of get that idea of that same kind of end result. But instead of with flame, it is, the chemical phrase would be alkaline hydrolysis, water cremation, rhizomation it's called, where instead of flame, you're put in hot water with lye. So instead of burning, you dissolve. So some people think this is a lot better. They don't like fire. They'd rather, water cremation. But they don't necessarily think about what does it actually mean, and it means being dissolved with lye. So where do you think that water goes at the end of that, with all of your dissolved? That's correct. It goes right down the sewer. That's correct. So that potassium hydroxide, also known as potash lye, is added to about 400 liters of water in that device, and you see the device on an angle, and that kind of agitates up and down just to kind of, simmer on the back of the stove. And it moves up and down, and the flesh dissolves, right? In lye, obviously it's going to dissolve. And you're left with bones and teeth, which is all you're ever left with any kind of cremation acclimation process. And the bones and teeth, after the water drains, are scraped out of the device and ground up, and you get back a bag of white sandy stuff, which is ground up teeth. So, Desmond Tutu chose that, thought that was a more environmental way to go than cremation. Well, yeah, probably is, because it's about 6 hours at 175 degrees centigrade as opposed to the energy that's used in cremation. And there's nothing going into the air, but there is something going into the sewer system. So, many shades of green. What's environmental to you? We're going to get to that. Hold that thought. So right now, this is not available in Nova Scotia. It's not legal in Nova Scotia. It probably will be. There are people that are lobbying for it, but it's a very expensive piece of equipment, so it's not like every funeral home's going to buy one. But people from Nova Scotia are traveling to other provinces, so Quebec, Ontario, Saskatchewan, Newfoundland, Labrador, interestingly enough, and Northwest Territories all have this as a legal option for disposition, and funeral homes are doing this. Now, interestingly, Desmond Tutu, you see there in the middle, the bishops, I guess they are, carrying a casket first. So he was in a casket to start with, a plain pine box for all the ritual and ceremony and so on, and then he went and did the lye thing. So that's acclimation. Now, fire. So a couple possibilities here, and usually if I do this in big groups, somebody asks about Viking options. Not legal in Canada to do Viking flaming boats in the ocean, nor is a funeral pyre legal in Canada. Colorado is the only place in North America where you could have a funeral pyre. So if you want to do that, you're going to have to go to Colorado. However, cremation has been growing, and especially during COVID, it grew even more. And when we talk about how green is it, well, there are some things that are greener, but some things that aren't. So it does use less land if we're thinking about burying bodies. That's true. However, there's lots of things that aren't so green. So the container often is not biodegradable that's used to hold the remains. The fossil fuel that's used for at least 2 to 3 hours at 1700 to 1900 degrees Fahrenheit. So think about what your oven does when you put it on self-clean, and it goes to, 500 or 600 maybe at that point. This is 17 to 1900. 2 to 3 hours, and then it has to cool down, and then they have to fire it up again for the next person. And obviously, from an ethical perspective, there's only supposed to be one person in there at a time. So these machines are going 24 hours a day in some cases. So that's happening all day long, 7 days a week in some cases. And you see the stack there, there's stuff coming out the top, and depending on what mercury and dental work and so on, there's other things coming out the top. We know that there's some other stuff that contributes to acid rain, for example, that's coming out, particulates and other things that are coming out of there. And the remains are toxic to plants. So spreading cremated remains around the rose bush might end up in a dead rose bush, even though people think that it's a good thing to do. So what have we got at the end? We talk about ashes. That is not the right word. Don't use ashes when it comes to cremated remains, because there is no ash. Where do we get ash? When we burn what? Wood. Wood leaves ash. Bodies don't. It's almost all water and stuff that just disappears at that temperature. So what's left? Bones and teeth. That's it. So the incinerator, we don't call it an incinerator, of course. We call it a retort because we don't want to use the word incinerator, but it is an incinerator. And so the container goes in there, and the container is either a cardboard box or a casket, which could be a plain pine casket, or it could be a beautiful mahogany casket with brass trim and bronze and all kinds of stuff made of wood from an endangered rainforest, because the family was talked into buying the beautiful casket because they really loved her, and so therefore they should have the nice casket. Could be any of those things that's going in there into the incinerator. And at the end of it, all that's left, bones, teeth, artificial hip, bronze or brass hinges from the fancy casket, and that's all scraped out into a bin and there's a magnet that goes over to get the pin that was in your ankle and pull out the artificial hip and the hinges from the fancy casket, and then the bones and the teeth are dumped into a thing that looks like a giant food processor called a cremulator, and it grinds them all up into a sand. And you get the bag of sand back. And in this case, the bag of sand is gray. In the water one, it's white because of the lye. It's kind of keeping everything bleached and white. This one, because of the high heat, it's gray. And it's usually quite fine, but sometimes, people get it and they shake it up a little bit and they think, oh, what's that? Well, it's going to be ground up, but it's not all ground up. The only thing that gets taken out of a person before they go into a crematorium is a pacemaker, because they blow up, because they have batteries. So that's a bad thing. So if there's pacemaker, there's an invasive piece of taking that out. Everything else stays in. And the toxicity of the bones and teeth at that point is because of that high heat. For that period of time, the pH is very high, much higher than plants can take. So it's toxic to plants. Next one. Oh, any questions?
So you put something in there, you put something
We're the only ones in Atlantic Canada that use an additive. There is an additive that you can put with cremated remains to neutralize the toxicity. So any cremation that I'm involved in has to have the additive to address that. And if you're going to scatter, as people sometimes want to do, it takes about 3 months before you can do that. It has to allow that neutralization to happen. If you're going to bury the remains in a biodegradable container, actually go back one if you can, please, Rhonda. So I showed the container there, the bronze one. If you're going to, we don't do that. It has to be a biodegradable container, and I brought one just so you can see what they might look like, a plain pine one as an example. If you wanted to do that, then I'd have to refer you to somebody else. But if you're using a biodegradable container, you can bury them right away, because by the time the biodegradable container biodegrades, the neutralization will have happened. The other thing I put on here is just that helicopter, because that's available in Nova Scotia now, which is another one of my little things that I just don't quite get. But you could pay an extra $6,000 and you can have your remains scattered over Sambro Island. They were out at the end of the harbor, so it kind of is the Sambro Island area that I live out there. So every now and then I see a helicopter and I think, oh, is that doing practice or is that dropping somebody over the island? But that's, the sort of stuff that some people think they might want. Anything else about cremation?
So the pine box that you brought,
Mm.
pine box,
Mm.
by the time that degrades, then everything is all mixed up and it's all okay.
You could bury that today and you're fine. Yeah.
And that would be your option, or is there?
You could use cardboard. You could use cardboard. You could use a cloth bag. You could do your jewelry box. It's going to take 3 months for it to biodegrade, so it'll be fine by the time that happens. Any kind of container is going to take time.
Is that assuming that you put the additive in?
Yeah, with the additive. No, with the additive. Just bringing the pH down. So it's just a combination. Yeah, so it's just a combination of stuff. I don't have it with me. But a combination of basically a neutralizing additive, and I can't tell you right off the top what it is, but it's neutralizing the pH. Okay, so then, contemporary burial. We know what contemporary burial is. Contemporary burial generally involves a casket of some sort and a full body burial. So what are the options there? So composting, a lot of people are interested in composting. We can't do that in Canada yet. It's not legal here. It is in other places. In the US, it's legal. So you can't just have somebody in compost in the backyard. But you can do it if you want to go somewhere else. So next one. In Seattle, for example, a lot of people from British Columbia go across the border, and these pictures on the bottom and the one on the top right are the same place in Seattle. And this is called natural organic reduction, because they don't want to say human composting, which is what it is. And then the line or the word to be similar to cremation and aquamation is terramation. And this is where a body is mixed with organic material in a container. So that bottom one, those are all pods, all those white circles like the one on the top right. And a body is placed in a container with some additional organic material. The temperature will rise naturally, but they keep the temperature at about 55 degrees. And in 2 to 3 months, there's basically nothing left. And you've got cubic meter of pretty good compost. And so it can go, there's a particular conservation area that sometimes that goes to if a family or friends don't want to take it back. It can be also quite simple. The one on the bottom right shows a simpler version, which is like a giant bathtub with wheels, because you kind of rotate it every now and then just to keep the organic material moving. And this obviously came from the agricultural industry, because this was how a lot of farm animals and so on would have been dealt with, and still are, is to be composted in a similar kind of way. So that is possible. There are people in Canada who are trying to get this legal here, but to date it is not. Just so you know. Then, of course, there's green burial, which people think, oh, this is a new thing. It's actually not. It's what we would have done all the time up until the last couple of generations. It would have been the norm, and it still is the norm in much of the world. It still is certainly the norm for people in other faith groups, and Muslim and Jewish faiths. This is what they do anyway. So it's not like it's something new or something out of the ordinary. It's just that we have been conditioned to think we have to do things differently since the American Civil War, when embalming became a thing to bring soldiers back from fields, bring them back home. They had to be embalmed in order to be able to do that, and then that kind of took off. But a lot of people like this because it is a natural approach. It is a much more sort of environmental and I think it has a lot to do with how people grieve and how people see themselves as making a decision, that their final decision is one that supports kind of an environmental philosophy and sense of values. Next one. And we see lots of people doing this. It's all over the sort of the socioeconomic base. But people that like to sort of do it yourself, they want to have more family involvement, that can be a reason, or people that just have that environmental piece. But it often involves a lot of family connection or friends. The picture on the right is from a conservation site in the US where people do a lot of things often in the bottom of the hole. They may or may not be involved in digging the hole themselves, and they may do lots of things with in this case, leaves or other things to kind of create their own traditions. I had a beautiful one not long ago in the valley where friends and family sat around the casket, a plain pine box, of course, and drew on it. They had their markers, their water-based markers, and they were doing art on the casket before it was buried. It was pretty awesome. Okay, so where can you do this? Well, everywhere in Canada there are places to do it. There's a certification process that some cemeteries go through where they commit to certain things. It can be a regular cemetery, regular meaning a contemporary cemetery that allows this between existing plots. So you might have an embalmed person over here and another embalmed person over there, and you're green in the middle. You can do that, and there are cemeteries that, most cemeteries will allow that. Or they might have a separate section that's all green. There's lots of different possibilities. These pictures tend to be the conservation sites, because that's what I'm most interested in, and I'm working on a conservation site that we hope to have in St. Margaret's Bay in the next year, hopefully. So there's a few principles around what happens with green burial that all are about having minimal environmental impact, obviously, that's pretty key, and reducing your carbon footprint, and not just not damaging the land, but hopefully restoring and preserving it. Next one. So 5 principles. First one, absolutely no embalming. Now there are embalming fluids coming along that are supposed to be environmental, plant-based, but I don't think we have a real sense of that yet, and I still don't understand why this would even be something that people would want either, because embalming is an extremely invasive process, and unless there was some absolute requirement, meaning highly infectious disease or requirement to move a body across international borders, then there shouldn't be a need, because the only purpose is to prevent decomposition, prevent any kind of natural process, and keep a body in the exact same state it's in potentially forever, is kind of the idea. It uses formaldehyde.
Drain out all the blood.
Yeah, pump it out, so there's tubes going in, and all your organs have to be punctured first, and it's not a very good thing to do. So yes, blood is all drained out, and formaldehyde replaces it. So direct earth burial is the second principle, whereby meaning the whole body is buried. wrapped in something or in a container that is biodegradable. So you're seeing here a shroud, wicker, cardboard box, plain pine box, the good old pine box. All of those are options. Number 3. The idea of restoring a site. So the picture on the bottom obviously is what happens to land that is a contemporary cemetery that is no longer able to be used for anything else. Usually there are no walking trails or bird watching or other things happening on the same property. Some people will go for walks, and there are some that certainly have nice walks, but in general that land is now no longer usable for anything else, as opposed to a site where, and again that's a conservation site, it doesn't have to be a conservation site, but there can be protection to ensure that that space is not damaged further. There would generally not be fertilizer or pesticide or herbicides used. And in the purest sense, you'd do hand digging. You wouldn't bring in a gas-powered or diesel-powered machine, but sometimes you have to.
And so these, the cemeteries are, is that always in perpetuity, or sometimes it's 40 years?
That's an excellent question. I'm a proponent of reusing cemetery plots. We don't in Canada because we think we have so much land, we don't have to worry about how much land we use. In Europe, in most places, you rent your spot. You don't buy a plot and you're basically getting a deed here and you own that forever. So these plots that I said, 5 spots, the family owns it forever. In Europe, you would rent it, and it depends on the particular place how long you're renting it for. Could be 10 years, could be 50 years. Decomposition varies depending on the chemistry and the environment. But at the end of that time, you either rent it again, or the bones are taken and put in an ossuary, and that is rented again to another person. Here we don't do that, but we can. It's not against the law. And in fact, both the United Church and the Anglican Church have statements that say, in the city of Halifax, 40 years seems to be the magic number. Well, there's nothing left in 40 years, that's for sure. The bones maybe, but nothing left. You can certainly reuse it. But we haven't, because we think we have lots of land. So here you're doing it in perpetuity still when you buy at a cemetery. In green cemeteries, you tend to avoid the giant marble stones brought from Italy or wherever it might be, and use local materials or have a communal one. That one in the middle, my partner in crime on this development of a conservation site in St. Margaret's Bay, Ray Matholi, took that in the UK. That was kind of a neat one made of wood in a green cemetery there. Or they use stones, local stones that are engraved that are on site, or technologies being used where we're seeing QR codes. I visited one in New Hampshire that there's little stakes almost like the survey pins that have QR codes, and you can get videos and whatever from that.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So sometimes people like to do rubbings of the tombstone, and they do genealogy.
Yeah.
And they look back and stuff. Somebody who may not have any kids, they don't have descendants. Is there, at a place where you're getting organized, would there be some kind of record at, I don't know, vital statistics to say there was a person?
Has to be. You have to know the GPS coordinates of everybody. Yeah, so you have to have that recorded, and the operator of a cemetery or a church or whoever has to have records that this person is buried there and here are the coordinates of it. And in most cases there is some stone or communal thing. In the one we're working on, it's full of boulders, of course. It's like most of Nova Scotia, it's been glaciated and there are boulders everywhere. So those local boulders will be used for engraving. So there will be something.
And the vital statistics office has a record.
It's not actually vital statistics that would have the GPS. It would be the cemetery has to have that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if somebody wants to do genealogy.
Yep, got to have it. Got to know. And if you're buried on your own land, you've got to have the GPS coordinates on your own land of where the body is buried, and it's supposed to be attached to the deed so that if that land is ever sold and somebody's making a new garden, they don't get a surprise. It's not good. That surprise. Okay, optimize the land use. So this is, again, this idea of doing other things on the land. So the picture there on the bottom is a little bathhouse. The one in the middle on the bottom, that's in one of the U.S. conservation sites. They do yoga with goats at the cemetery, and they have a little farm there as well. One on the top is Turtle Project in one. Bottom one on the right's in Victoria. They have beehives. So, being as creative as possible to have multiple things happening on the land and be sustainable as you can with those processes. So those are the 5 principles of natural or green burial. Next one. I just wanted to quickly say that the caskets can be a real issue, not just the fact that they're made out of wood that is potentially, if it's mahogany and other things, those are endangered in many parts of the world, and we use that, the most beautiful wood, for these in some cases, or it could be bronze or plastic. I went to a conference in Las Vegas, which of course you're going to see anything and everything at a funeral conference in Las Vegas, including glass caskets with lighting inside that change colors. So, you can do anything. So there's the wood itself, there's how it's put together, there's the hinges and the handles, there's the paint and the varnish and the shellac, and there's all of the fabric inside. All of those things are issues when you think about being green. Next one. Caskets and urns. So I brought one made by the guy in the middle at the top. That's Jeremy Burrell. And he lives in Fredericton, and he's got a little company called Fiddlehead Caskets, and he makes kits that he ships all over the world now, and he makes the urns as well. And one of his kits is on the top right there as a bookcase first. I have one of those bookcases in my office, so I'm all set. I've got my casket all ready to go, and it's a bookcase at the moment. There are also wicker, but a lot of people that think, oh, I'm going to have this lovely wicker casket, sometimes they're shipped here from China. You can buy them on Amazon, so may not be environmental at the end of the day if you're having a wicker casket shipped from China. Or they can be cardboard, or people there drawing and coloring and doing various things. Next one. Okay, there's mine. So that was in the newspaper when we started this. So that's putting together a kit at the bottom that we did for somebody. That's an amazing group of women in Antigonish that make wicker ones on the bottom left. That's Jeremy and I putting together mine, and it made it to the newspaper when I stood in it there. So, yeah.
What's the name of the business?
I think I brought a couple of her brochures, I think. I'll think of it in a minute. Sean Turner is her name, S-I-A-N. If you Googled Sean Turner. I just can't think of the name of it. But anyway, they're absolutely spectacular, hand-woven. She's growing the willow now. She's got a willow farm, and they've got a little collective of basket weaving and so on. Okay.
Does she make ours?
No, she doesn't make urns yet. No. Shrouds, you can use your grandmother's quilt. You could use a Hudson's Bay blanket. You could use silk. That bottom left is a beautiful silk, hand-painted with water-based paint. Jeremy does the one in the middle. It's just plain cotton. But you don't have to buy anything. If you want to use a quilt or a Hudson's Bay blanket, you're good. Okay. In Atlantic Canada, we have one certified hybrid one in Prospect, the Sunrise Park Interfaith. He has a section, the upper right is the section of his contemporary cemetery where he's basically just letting the grass grow and letting it rewild back to whatever species come along and planting things. And there are others. Halifax Municipal Cemeteries are good with green burial now. There's still a few spaces in Fairview, not very many, but few. Burlington in the Valley, I've used that one. Lower Sackville. But basically any cemetery can do green burial. They just might not know it. So often people will call me and say, oh, I bought this lot in Middleton or whatever, and now I want to do green, and I called them and they say they don't do green. Give me the number. So I call them and say, well, what are the rules? Can we have a shroud? Yes. Can we be shallower? We don't want to be 6 feet. We only want to be 3.5 feet. Yes. Basically go through the question. Do you require a liner, fiberglass, plastic, concrete liner? No. Okay, then you do green burial, right? If you call them, they're going to say no because they don't understand what it is. So there are lots of choices in Nova Scotia. Next one. And then lots of other things that I say you need to think about when you think about the shades of green, because we could do all of this and then have everybody drive to some event, one person in a car, and have all kinds of flowers with foil and plastic and green spongy stuff and disposable dishes and foolish laminated bookmarks that we give out and flowers that come from South America and balloons and all these things that contribute to the overall sense of how green is it. So I always just put that in to say, think about that at the same time. And then all of these things that you hear about on National Enquirer are usually not anything. So we heard about mushroom suits because Luke Perry chose a mushroom suit, and the woman in the middle is the person who invented it. They don't exist anymore because they didn't actually do anything. So no, there are no mushroom suits. And then people have seen pictures of these pods. Oh, I want to do that pod thing where you kind of are like a, folded up in that and there's a tree in it. That doesn't actually exist either. It was a neat idea, but it's never actually been produced and no indication whether it would ever be allowed anyway. So it doesn't exist. You can't do it. Home funerals you can do. So I always just put that in there that you can do everything at home. You do not need to have a funeral home involved in anything. If you choose to do everything yourself, that is legal. You just have to file the paperwork and get the certificates that are needed. But it is possible to do full home funerals, and there are groups of people in Nova Scotia as part of communities that are doing this, and we support that as well if people choose to do that. Next one. And lots of reasons why it's good to do, I think. It's an interesting thing for people that want to do things by themselves. You see the little child there with the shovel. See people, again, doing art and being very involved. There's lots of research around the grief side of a loss of a person when you've had that kind of involvement, to have that more personal and authentic kind of old-fashioned, shall we say, approach to funerals. Next one. And then there are people that are doulas that we have on our team, of people that support end of life and but can't do anything once a person has died. That if you're paying somebody to do anything with a body after a person has died, it must be a licensed funeral director. They have the monopoly on how to do that, which is not a bad thing. You want people who are skilled that know what they're doing. So once a person has died, licensed funeral directors take over, or you do it yourself. If you're not paying somebody, anybody can do it. Okay, next one. Just going to wind up. So then we have celebrants. I'm a celebrant. I do a lot of services of people that want either a non-faith-based approach or in partnership because they have some interest in doing other types of services where their own faith may not be supportive of something that's a little more out of the ordinary. So that's an option. And then we do all these different things that are on here, which I won't go through because our time is pretty much up, and I wanted to give you time if you had any other questions. That's our team. Carry on, carry on. We're good. We're B Corp and Community Interest Company. There you have it.
So if you decide at home,
Yep.
can you arrange and get all the documents and do just like you would if you
Yep.
were working with a funeral home or whatever?
Yep.
So you could have all that with your...
Yep. You can do everything at home yourself. You can get all the documentation you need yourself, or somebody can do it. It's going to take a little longer. You can still do it in time to do a green burial. The thing that a funeral home can do for you that you can't do yourself is get the burial permit and the certificate of death online almost instantly. If you're doing it yourself, you got to go to the office, the vital statistics office, and wait hours, potentially, to get that paperwork yourself, but you can do it. But that's one of the tricky things. And you're obviously doing body care yourself as opposed to paying for a funeral director to do that. But people choose to do that. Washing, clothing, whatever you choose to do. Yeah, which people do. And keeping cool. Depending on your timing, you got to keep cool. Which you can do with freezer packs. It's not that hard. You got about 4 days. About 4 days for a green burial. Yeah. So that's what I thought I would present to you, but I'm open to questions if you have any. Stunned silence. Anything at all? There's lots to do. Yep. It's a to-do list, and we procrastinate, and we put it off, and we're going to get to it. But that's a big part of this. Is
So my parents both spoke of having wakes in the family home.
Mhm. Mhm.
So those bodies wouldn't have been embalmed. There would have been the same.
They may have been. My father was in the living room, and he was embalmed. He was in our home, in our living room. He went from the hospital to a funeral home, and then came back for the wake at the house. But he was embalmed. So, yeah, and my grandmother would have been the same way. So that's going back more than 60 years. So they were embalming then. We've been embalming for a long time, since the American Civil War. Not everybody, but a lot. It'll come back.
Yes, so you do services, you help with downsizing.
Yes.
This is when a person isn't alive.
Yeah, usually, not always.
Usually, okay, well, that's my question. If somebody maybe doesn't need downsizing, maybe they can do that themselves, but then they're dead and they, a few relatives go in and pick up this or that, something else, and then there's a whole slew of stuff left. So
We get the call, usually from a family member in Ontario or Alberta or wherever they are, who says so-and-so just died in a nursing home or in an apartment, and nobody wants anything that's there, and the apartment has to be cleared out by the end of the month. Can you do that?
and you can do that?
Mm-hmm.
And so where do those things go?
It depends. Probably a lot of it will sadly end up in the dump because it's not really stuff that anybody's going to want for anything, and depends on the time. Right? It's always time dependent. If we get a call today and somebody's got to be out of their room by the end of September, there's not going to be a lot of time to sell or even find good homes for things. We do the best we can to donate. Right now, for example, one of my key donation places has been the resettlement group that we're over here on Agricola, and they're looking for a new space. They don't have a warehouse at the moment, so nobody, Habitat for Humanity, Parker Street, you've got to know, do they have space to take it? And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. So we kind of go through the list of places that can come and help. Put Mosh on the list, whoever can come and get it. That's the key, and timing, right? Sometimes I call somebody to come and get, well, yeah, we can come, but it won't be till 2 weeks from Wednesday. No can do, it's got to be empty tomorrow, and I can't store it. So that's a challenge. So we donate as much as we can. Then lots goes to Mission Mart, or if the person has a choice, I'd like it to go wherever, that's what we do. But not everything will find a home.
And so can somebody find out how much it would cost, how much they should sort of allocate in their will? I want this done, I want stuff to go to charity, I want people to do that, so here's X
Yeah.
number of dollars.
Yeah, we can estimate that. Yep, can estimate what that would be. You have to see, there's a balance of just how much stuff there is, the density. Are we talking a hoarder or are we talking a minimalist? There's a difference, big difference, right? Big difference. And are we talking when they're alive, the hardest thing I think for downsizing for folks when they know they have to do this and they're being forced or they've made the choice to do it, is that people think their belongings are worth a lot more and are more valuable than they actually are. So they will say, oh, I've got this silver, and I've got, Royal Dalton figurines, and I have a lot of beautiful china, and it's all very valuable. It's worthless. Sorry, but it's worthless, right? Or I have a piano, and it cost a lot 35 years ago or 65 years ago, and it's worth a lot. Not anymore, it's not. Or, whatever, furniture and antiques that they think are valuable. Sadly, and it's painful, and it's very painful to me to see, the Wedgwood or the Royal Daltons or the Burke's flatware. Not worth anything. Nobody wants it. That's right. So then my usual conversation with people when we go and meet with the poor little old lady with her china and her mother's china and her aunt's china, just 3 sets of china or whatever it might be, and this is the Royal Albert and this is the Royal Dalton. And it was very, very expensive, they say. And then I would generally say, so if you wanted to buy that now, you wanted to buy a set of china like that, where in Halifax would you go to buy that?
Mission Mart and hope for the best.
You got it. There is no store in Halifax where you would go to buy that. So what does that tell you? Or you want, something like the Burke's flatware silver. Where would you go in Halifax to get this? Same place.
Best friend's grandma's house.
That's right. That's it. Nowhere else. So, or cups and saucers. Oh, gosh. Or Hummels. Oh, my God. We moved a lady not long ago. I don't even want to think about how many Hummels. Worthless. Thimbles, containers, thimble cases. Those are very valuable. Yeah, not so much.
Can I just ask, what does losh mean? We always need furniture, we always need like kitchen stuff, clothes, you name it, we need it. For people who are making a start.
Yeah, if we're switching from a sleeping rough or sleeping tent to having a first apartment in however many years.
So do you have a, pardon me, do you have a phone number, like do you have a website or something?
So it's part of the Northland Community Health Center. They've got their own website, and then there's a branch for Launch, and then I can give you my address. Sign up for housing placements. We've already moved people from streets to under a roof. My number's 902-880-8524. And anytime I get a call that there is a bed, I rent a new call the same day.
So that's why I was just going to ask you how you transport it. You get UL.